Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, a new dawn for the Good Dram Show, shall we say, as I've finally got hold of a camcorder, and hopefully the image quality and sound quality is considerably better than what it has been. So, yeah, really quite looking forward. I've been playing with my toy, so to speak. So hopefully it shouldn't be, I think I've probably got a grip to it. So anyway, bit of news before we kick off with today's episode of the show, which is sort of a bit of a random episode, sort of angels and devils, I guess, if you like, given the, or angels and beasties or whatever, given the whiskies we'll be looking at. But it's basically, I found out sort of earlier this week that the Americans haven't been too happy with some of the scores that their whiskies have been getting in the Whisky magazine. And well, what can you say? I mean, all you can do is judge what's in front of you, and if they're going to send over young, poor quality whiskey at the end of the day, what do they expect? You know, you can't taste something and think, yeah, that's brilliant, when it's far from it, and it's always difficult to give a sort of, you know, a glowing review of something that frankly doesn't deserve it. So, you know, if the Americans want sort of, you know, decent reviews of their whiskey, then send decent whiskey over. It's as simple as that, rather than moaning about what you have sent. But anyway, that's by the by, to be honest with you. So well, we're not tasting any American whiskey this afternoon, so doesn't really matter, does it? But this is a bit of a, like I say, it's a bit of a sort of random, but there is a kind of theme, if you see what I mean. I've basically got a blend, a vatted grain, and 3 vatted malts. So, you know, it's kind of, it's sort, you know, I thought they worked all right together, and hopefully they will. So let's just introduce this afternoon's little lineup then. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off this afternoon's little tasting with a blend. This is called Angel's Nectar. It's bottled at 40% and is bottled by a company called Highfern, who, as you probably know, have the distribution rights to Schmogan, which I tasted a few weeks ago. So and taste this, and you know, I stock it. So I think that's pretty much given it the seal of approval, shall we say? So, but we'll taste that and come to it. The second whiskey I'm going to look at is a vatted grain whiskey. Now, you know that I love grain whiskies, and big thank you to Compass Box, to Herman, for sending me the samples of their 2 new releases. And this is the Hedonism Quindecimus, which is their 15th anniversary bottling, apparently. And it's, like I say, it's a vatting of various grain whiskies of various ages. It includes, and you know, got the list here, and talk about anally retentive and doing things to the nth point. But it has 17.6%, you know, exactly 17.6% of 20-year-old North British grain, aged in first fill American Standard barrels. 36.6% of 25-year-old Port Dundas, aged in rejuvenated hogsheads. 8.4% of 28-year-old Dumbarton, aged in American Standard barrels. 19.4% of 20-year-old Port Dundas, aged in first fill American Standard barrels. And apparently 18% of this is roughly 32-year-old mystery pre-blended barrel that came from Loch Lomond. American Standard barrel, but like I said, it was already vatted together and aging at Loch Lomond, so could be anything in that, I suppose. But anyway, looking forward to tasting that, because I do like the Hedonism, and I love what Compass Box do with their grains. And then on to the first of the 3 vatted malts. This is Peat's Beast. Now, Peat's Beast is produced by company called Fox Fitzgerald, and I got sent samples recently because they've changed their distribution company and have released a cask strength bottling, which is this one. So Peat's Beast is, I've tasted it before and really enjoyed it, to be honest with you. It's a vatting of Ben Ryack and Cole Ealer, bottled at 46%, and this is the new bottling, a cask strength bottling, bottled at 52.1%. And last but not least, we'll be looking at this. This is the new bottling of Peat Monster by Compass Box. Now, you know I've had issues with the whole Peat Monster terminology and what have you. We went through this one, I think, when I did the last Compass Box tasting. So I think this will be the 4th time I've actually done an episode of the show with Compass Box whiskies. So they keep sending me the samples. Who am I to argue? So this is the Magnum release, i.e. as in large bottle thereof, at natural cask strength of 57.3%. So now, if I remember rightly, the last bottling they did, I think, contained some leche. I don't know exactly what's in this bottling, but having tasted it already, it didn't taste of cardboard. So I'm guessing that probably the leche has been kind of just dropped off, shall we say. But anyway, we'll get to that at the very end. So without much further ado, let's taste a bit of Angel's Nectar then, shall we? Right, okay, so let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? That's a nice nose. It's fresh, gristy, quite a bit of grain. It's got a sort of a herbal, fresh intensity to it. Lemon, a little bit of lime, bit of vanilla, a little bit of toffee. There's some nice malty barley character underneath, with a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of sweet honey. It's nice. It's a very pleasant, yeah, quite nicely put together. Fairly heavy on the grain, like I said, but that's not to sort of, you know, denigrate it in any way. It's got a nice fullness, got some complexity. A little bit of spice coming through now. Palate. Opens up with quite a pleasant amount of fruit, the barley, the malt. Finishes more on the grain, the slightly herbal grain. I'm getting a little bit of coffee from the oak, a little bit of herbal character, a little bit of dried fruit, almost that sort of sherry-like, sort of refill sherry-like herbal character. I mean, there might be a little bit in there, but it is quite light, so I'm guessing it's probably all American oak. It's young, it's enthusiastic, it's pleasant. I mean, I remember tasting that first time I tasted that was for the Whisky magazine, and obviously I didn't know what it was, and I was thinking, yeah, this is quite pleasant. Yeah, probably could do with a bit more time, a bit more age, but you know, and I think it probably could do. But as we all know, blends are made to a price point. You have obviously your restrictions on sort of the age of the products that you can use. So, but I think sort of all things considered, I think that's a lovely blend. It's got a lovely freshness, crispness, a bit of grassiness. I'd guess there's a reasonable degree of either Spey or Highland malt in that. It has that. Doesn't quite have the minerality of Highland, so probably a little bit more heavy on the Spey, I would have thought. Some nice grain, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pleasant, and it's not particularly expensive either. So in the grand scheme of the more upper echelons of blended whiskies, so yeah, nice starter, I think. Right, on to the Quindecimus then. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Oh yes, that's grain whiskey. Beautifully fragrant, a lovely combination of both sweet grainy notes and crisper grainy notes. A little bit of vanilla, a little bit of dried fruit. It's got quite a nice weightiness to it. I mean, the Dumbarton I've often found to be quite oily and quite weighty as a grain, and it certainly is having a lot more influence above its 8.4 to be precise percent composition of this blend. It's got some nice fruit, a little bit of banana, some apricot, pineapple, that lovely dried lighter grape satsuma sultana kind of character, rather than the sort of heavier raisiny kind of character you get with sherry. It's got some nice oak, there's a lovely combination of oak. You're certainly getting the sort of first fill vanillins and the dustiness from age, but you're also getting a little bit of sort of vibrant tannic American oak notes as well. A little bit of smoke coming through now. That is fantastic. That really is good, and it's just such a unique character, grain whiskey. And you know, if you've never had a grain whiskey, then get your hands on one. You know, ideally get your hands on this, but this is over £100 a bottle. So, but you know, the standard Hedonism is still fairly expensive, but about par for the course with grain whiskies of that age. Oh, it's a lovely oiled character. I mean, when I tasted this first for the Whisky magazine before Compass Box actually sent me the sample, and I thought that's nicely moderately aged, and I was right. I mean, moderately aged, in my opinion, for grain whiskies is anything between sort of 25 and, well, probably 28 and 30, 32, really. I mean, grain whiskey doesn't really start to come into its own until it's at least about sort of 21. Oh, it's gorgeous, lovely. Palate. Oh my god, that finish is incredible. Coconut, loads of coconut, spice, and dry chocolatey tannins. But first up, you get the more sweeter elements, the sweeter fruits, the sweeter grain character, and as it progresses, then you start to get the more slightly herbally, the more sort of fresher, intense, crisper, grainier spices coming through. Oh, but that finish is just absolutely fantastic. Like I said, lots of coconut. That's obviously the first fill American oak. It's got some nice vanilla, some grittiness to it. That is just a really very, very good vatting. It's got so much complexity, so much character. Oh yeah, that's fantastically good. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the Vatted and peaty malts. So this is Peat's Beast, bottled at 46%. It's got a really nice, fresh, coal eeler-like nose. Getting some lemon, some lime, some sort of high-toned phenolics. Not too peaty, but there's a nice sort of balance of phenolic peat and smoky peat. It's got some weight underneath it, a little bit. I'm guessing that sort of the Ben Ryack is adding a little bit more weight than possibly the coal eeler. It certainly reminds me more of old school coal eeler, the less oily style of coal eeler, the fresher style of coal eeler. A little bit of burnt wood, a little bit of perfume, a little bit of white flowers, some nice barley. I mean, that's again a lovely vatting. It's all well put together. A little bit manure-y now. A little bit of smoke. Palate. That's a lovely violety tinged smoky finish. A little bit more oak showing on the palate, a little bit more toffee, a little bit more vanilla. Kind of does take the edge off the fresher intensity, but it certainly kind of comes back on the middle. You're certainly getting that brininess, that dusty, violety, sweet peat, a little bit of burnt wood, some chocolate. That's really full, that's really nice. It's got a light astringency right on the aftertaste, which kind of like gives you a kind of Moorish sort of feeling. That again is really very, very good and not particularly expensive. I mean, I forget what it's going to retail at, but it never was particularly expensive the first time round, sort of mid-30s. Yeah, another great vatted malt, I think. Right, okay, so moving on to the cask strength bottling of Peat's Beast. Let's see what those gives us on this then, shall we? Possibly a bit fresher, but there's an obvious similarity between the two. That's a little bit more herbal, a little bit more manure-y now in actual fact. This has got more freshness, a bit more lemon, but a bit more oiliness as well. It's a bit of a contradiction, it has to be said. Like I said, it's got the freshness, but it's got the oils as well, which kind of are sort of almost starting to take the edge off that freshness. Not quite as heavily peated, or should we say the peat is not quite as obvious. Some pleasant vanilla, some fruit. Yeah, a little bit of burnt wood, a little bit of toffee. Palate. That's a nice finish. It's oilier on the palate again. A little bit muting, it has to be said. Not quite so fresh as the 46% bottling. It's got a lovely spicy, almost kind of rock salt finish, which is kind of almost tingling on the tongue. The alcohol level is just about right, I think. It kind of almost enhances that kind of tingling feeling. Although it's oily, it doesn't quite seem to have the weight of the 46% bottling, which is actually quite surprising. And the peat is drier, it's less sweet. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what happens when we do that. A bit more lemony now, but it's lost some of that complexity. And I think the thing was, I think the spirit was maybe just a bit too oily to start off with. I mean, it's pleasant, but it doesn't quite have the sort of the peaty intensity, the manuriness that the 46% bottling has. I mean, it's nice, it's pleasant, and it's a little bit more subtle, possibly, more subtle beastie, possibly. I have to say, I'm not really loving that palate. It's turned a little bit into sugar water, to be honest with you. The peat is drier. There isn't the sweetness. There's not the violetiness. There's not the manure-y character. It's a bit. I mean, it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a bit. Yeah, it's got a nice aftertaste. It's got a nice saltiness on the aftertaste, but it's a bit. Right, finally on to the Peat Monster Cask Strength, 57.3%. So let's see what the nose goes is on this then, shall we? It's quite phenolic. It's citrusy, but oily. But the oiliness is kind of under control. It's not too dominating. Quite a bit of oak, but again, that's kind of like sitting below. Feeding through a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of almost coconut character. It's more high-toned peated wise and a little bit more astringent than I remember Peat Monster, and a lot heavier on the peat as well. And like I said, there's none of that kind of slightly cardboardy note which would have been from the leche. I mean, it's possible that there's some leche in it. I mean, I've tasted leche that doesn't actually tend to sort of smell of wet cardboard, but bottlings tend to be few and far between. It has to be said. That's just the character of the whiskey. So yeah, it's got a nice oily lemon, lime. Oh, it's got really phenolic peat, really kind of up there and in your nose kind of thing. I mean, this is more a peat. This is more what I would expect from Peat Monster. I mean, maybe it's a slightly higher peating level. I mean, I know I've talked about Peat Monster and Compass Box, John Glazer's. It says it's because it was a creation rather than being an overt reference to huge gobbins of peat. But I don't know. I get the feeling they're using more heavily a peated malt these days. Because it's certainly, when I first tasted it way back when, it wasn't anywhere near as intensely peated as it is, or appears to be now. So it's got some crispness to it. It's got a light smokiness. That is actually very, very good. I think that's the first Peat Monster I've kind of warmed to be honest with you. I've always been a bit about it, to be honest with you, but I like this. There's a lot, what appears to be, again, sort of fresh herbally colheela coming through, but it's got a nice base as well, a nice oiliness, but again it's all like under control and all sort of nicely put together. Not got a bit of sweetness coming through now. Palate. That is seriously peated. Lots of it. Certainly on the finish. It's a little bit oilier on the palate, but there's still that lovely citrusness to it. But where the Peat Beast Cask Strength just didn't have the peat, the oils had all kind of sort of rumbled over it. This is the other way around. There's definite oils there, but there's lots of peat, lots of astringent coastal notes. Lovely spiciness on the finish as well, got a real bite to it. Dusty, coal dust aftertaste. Yeah, that almost kind of charcoaly sort of briquette kind of smoky, dusty. Little bit of herbalness. But yeah, that's seriously good. That is very, very impressive. And I'm going to put a little drop of water with it and see what happens to it. Hopefully it's not going to fall apart. Let's see. A little bit crisper now, a little bit more colheela like. Again, old school colheela, fresh, citrusy colheela. The peat has become sort of softer, smokier. I'm now getting some manure-y notes, some fishiness as well. Briny, oily, briny, almost tarry. Almost tarry. Yeah, that is nice. That's very good. bit more oak on the palate, a bit more. The oils have stepped forward. The peat is kind of skulked off a little bit, it has to be said. So we've got more of the sort of sweeter malt, apricot. It's still got a lovely dusty aftertaste with that sort of slightly burnt coastal wood. And it's probably rounder and fuller, a little bit sweeter now. I think I prefer it cask strength personally. I think it kind of has that lovely intensity, which kind of, when you tend to put water with some malts, they do tend to lose that intensity. They flesh out, they round out, which is certainly done, but they lose that little bit of intensity. But the aftertaste is still really nice. Still really peaty, dusty. Yeah, I like that. Right, okay, so let's sum this little tasting up then. Right, the Angel's Nectar. Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a lovely blend. I mean, it's about, what, mid-30s? So in, you know, the grand scheme of things, you can buy really dirt cheap blends. So it's kind of midpoint, I think, in the sort of scale of blends, pricing wise, and I really like it. I think it's got a lot going for it. Lovely freshness, nice intensity and grip. So yeah, I certainly would recommend that. The Hedonism Quindecimus, yeah, well, it's bloody good really at the end of the day. And you know, yes, it's a 3-figure bottling, yes, it's the anniversary bottling, but my God, that's worth it. I mean, that has just got so much depth and complexity, it's frightening. I mean, that is just very, very good blended vatted grain whiskey. Peach Beast then. I like the 46% bottling. I really do like it. I think it's a great vatting. It's probably a little bit more heavier on the coal eel. I don't tend, you know, there's a semblance of the Ben Ryack underneath it, but Ben Ryack can be quite a light spay, so it can add a little bit of floralness, maybe a little bit of weight, which maybe the coal eeler doesn't have. But aside from that, the emphasis is on the peat and on the coal eeler, and I like it. It's great. I love the 46%. I'm not so hot on the cask strength bottling. I don't think it's quite worked. It certainly doesn't quite have the intensity of peat that the Peat Monster has, to sort of carry off the additional alcohol. It's oilier, it's a little bit more subdued, it's just, you know, I mean, it's pleasant, but I think if I was given the choice between the two, then I would plump for the 46%. And the Peat Monster, well, yeah, I think this is probably the best vatting, best put together peat monster that I've tasted. It actually has some peat. Well, not to say that it never had peat, but you know what I'm getting at. It's got some intense peat. It's got some lovely manure-y character. It's got some burnt wood, some dusty, coal dusty kind of peat smoke. I mean, yeah. Maybe they have kind of saved the best for this Magnum bottling, which again is in 3 figures, but then obviously it's a larger bottling thereof. But I think, you know, I really think that sort of Peat Monster is starting to develop some peaty raw, should we say? Yeah, I think that's pretty good. So so yeah, well there you go. That's this week's episode of the show, all done and dusted. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'd just like to say a big thank you to all the companies involved that kindly sent me samples for this, and hopefully I've done them justice. And please don't shoot me about the about the cask strength Peach Beast. But like I said, I mean, next couple of weeks I'll start to sort of like do, like I was going to say, the A to Z of you know, the whisky distilleries. I haven't checked YouTube as yet to see if you've left any suggestions for distilleries you'd like me to look at, but I will obviously have a look and see if you have. So anyway, that's pretty much about it for this week's episode of the show. So all that's left to say is good dramming and good afternoon.